Chapter 1 Throne Room. Captain Jack Reeves twisted his wrists to shake off the tight grip of the Solvari guardsman who held him captive at gunpoint. His fingers were already numb from the restraint cuffs. The metallic scent of their space station filled his nostrils, a combination of cold metal and sterile air that never quite sat well with his human senses. "Relax," he muttered to himself through gritted teeth, glancing over his shoulder towards his crew standing in line behind him, heads hanging low like defeated puppies. They had been captured during what was supposed to be an easy smuggling run. Jack hadn't expected the Solvari space patrols to react so aggressively when they wandered into their territory by mistake. The guardsman shoved him forward roughly, and he stumbled onto a broad platform overlooking an enormous chamber filled with flickering lights that danced along intricate patterns etched into metallic walls. The throne room was vast enough to hold a small fleet of ships, yet it felt claustrophobic under the weight of its grandeur. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling in jagged formations, casting eerie shadows over polished silver floors. Jack's eyes locked onto the towering figure seated on an obsidian dais at the far end of the room. Queen Nyxara, the Still, her name a stark contrast to her imposing presence. At 7 feet tall, with silvery skin and long white hair that cascaded down her armored back like liquid moonlight, she was impossible to miss. Her guards flanked either side of her dais in perfect symmetry. Their silver armor gleamed menacingly under the artificial lights. Jack could hear whispers from the crowd gathered behind him, Solvari nobles who had come out for the spectacle and now buzzed with excitement like bees around a hive. "Your Majesty," one of his own crew members pleaded, stepping forward and falling to one knee in front of the dais. His voice was trembling despite his desperate attempt at bravado. "Please, we didn't mean any harm. We're just traders." Jack rolled his eyes. "Traitors? More like thieves who had gotten caught red-handed." "Silence!" Queen Nyxara's deep voice boomed across the chamber with an authority that made even Jack's heart skip a beat. Her gaze turned to him, unblinking silver eyes boring into his soul, as if she could see right through all of his defenses. "Captain Reeves, is it?" Jack straightened up and gave her a half-familiar rogue's grin meant to disarm more often than not. "The one and only." She leaned forward slightly from where she sat upon the throne, studying him with an intensity that made Jack shift uncomfortably under her scrutiny. "Why have you invaded our space?" she asked finally, voice cool as ice, but devoid of emotion. Jack shrugged nonchalantly, though inside he was sweating. "Blame it on a bad map and worse luck." Her lips twitched ever so slightly, a flicker of something akin to amusement that vanished almost instantly. Then came the dead silence. Every breath seemed amplified in this vast chamber, where even the faintest whisper echoed like thunder. And then, as if struck by some sudden revelation or inspiration, she leaned back against her throne and cocked an eyebrow at him. "You look bored," he said softly, enough so only she could hear it over the hushed murmurs of those around them. That caught everyone off guard, including Queen Nyxara herself, who stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. Jack seized his momentary advantage and stepped forward with a cocky bravado that belied the fear gnawing at him from within. "You look like you need an adventure," he said, voice rising slightly to carry across the room. "Want to ditch this place and see the stars?" There was another long pause, a beat of silence thick enough to cut through with a knife before it shattered spectacularly around them when Nyxara's voice broke through once more. "Was that a proposal?" she asked in such an incredulous tone that even Jack wasn't sure if he'd heard her correctly. Her court gasped collectively, their eyes wide and disbelieving as they took in the audacity of his challenge. For a moment, Time seemed to stand still while everyone waited for what would come next. But then, without hesitation or regret flashing across either man's face, Jack turned back towards Queen Nyxara with an unapologetic grin. "No," he said simply yet firmly, "but I'm not backing down now." And as the silence stretched out longer than any before it ever could have managed to do in this grand hall, where every word had always meant something specific and deadly serious, stakes were just that much higher this time around for a human who dared court such impossible danger with nothing but sheer audacity. Captain Jack Reeves was led down a cold metallic corridor by two of Queen Nyxara's guards, his hands cuffed tightly behind him. The ship's interior had an industrial feel to its sharp edges and unyielding surfaces that screamed efficiency over comfort. As they walked, he couldn't help but notice the faint hum of machinery in the background, a constant reminder that this wasn't just any prison cell. "Your Highness," one guard said as they reached a door marked with glowing red letters, "Cell 1345A." The metal bars slid open with an eerie silence, and he was pushed inside, his hands colliding harshly against the cold wall before being roughly turned around so that his back faced the guards. "Take him," one ordered in a deep voice as they watched to ensure compliance. Jack's heart pounded like a drumbeat in his ears, every moment stretched out agonizingly long as he waited for what would come next. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock at the door and another pair of guards entered, this time armed with restraints meant to secure him properly within the confines of the cell. Jack met their eyes defiantly, but allowed them to do as they pleased without resistance. It wasn't worth escalating things further if he had any hope of getting out alive. Once fully restrained by a set of thick metallic cuffs that locked around his wrists and ankles, hanging loosely from chains attached high above in the ceiling, so that even leaning against the wall required awkward positioning, Jack slumped onto the floor. The cell itself was small, barely more than 10 feet squared, and completely devoid of any furniture or amenities, except for a thin mattress set directly on the cold metal ground with what looked like an old pillow propped up beside it. He closed his eyes and leaned back against the wall, trying to slow down his racing thoughts. It had all happened so fast, from being caught in Sylvari space by mistake to making that impulsive joke about taking Queen Nyxara on a star cruzedo, finding himself now locked away with no clear way out of this mess. Suddenly, there was a soft sound at the door, and it opened slowly to reveal an unexpected visitor. The lights above flickered momentarily, as if startled by her presence. Queen Nyxara stepped inside, wearing full ceremonial armor, but carried none of its usual intimidation. Instead, she appeared almost contemplative as she made her way closer. Jack straightened up instinctively when he saw her enter the cell. "Well," he said with a mix of curiosity and caution in his voice, "what brings you here? A bit low for tea time, isn't it?" Nyxara paused at the edge of his makeshift bedroll, towering over him with an imposing presence that still managed to be oddly graceful even confined by her armor's weight. "You did not back down," she said finally, after a moment's silence. Her voice was deeper than before when they first met, but no less commanding. "Why?" Jack chuckled lightly despite the gravity of his situation, looking up at her with those piercing green eyes framed by dark stubble on his chin and cheeks. "I never do," he replied without hesitation. Her gaze shifted slightly, as if evaluating him anew based on this admission. She moved closer still, until she stood just above him, her silver skin gleaming under the harsh overhead lighting like liquid metal in motion. "Was that a proposal?" she asked again, though now there was no doubt their voice carried all of it without question. But something else seemed different too, perhaps less skepticism and more intrigue. Jack considered her words carefully for several long seconds before answering honestly. No, he admitted with another small grin tugging at his lips. Despite everything hanging in the balance here, he felt compelled to explain further, even though he knew there was little chance she would truly understand humor as humans did. But sometimes people acted based on gut feelings more than logic or reasoning. After Alan, that might just work for once, if they were ever going to get through this alive. I meant it like a joke, Jack told her then, with genuine earnestness coloring his tone, despite how absurd the notion must seem coming from him right now. Humans tell each other jokes when we're nervous. She watched him silently, eyes narrowing slightly as she digested what he said, a small sign of curiosity perhaps. He wondered if there was any hope in that glimmer, but couldn't shake off a feeling growing deep down inside. Jokes? Sara repeated slowly after another moment passed between them. I do not understand this concept, but I see courage. Jack's breath caught at her words, unsure how to take the implied compliment amidst all else going on around him right now, but grateful none the less for any form of recognition from such an imposing figure. All right, he responded quietly with a nod towards where she stood. You know what happens next? Her lips curled ever so slightly into something resembling amusement, their first expression since entering the cell, and it caught Jack off guard entirely just how much that single gesture changed everything about her presence in here right now. It felt human somehow. Combat challenge, Sara said clearly, eyes meeting his directly without flinching away, even as they held steady under hers. He swallowed thickly, but didn't back down, and from the gaze either, despite being restrained within this tiny space. Figured. And against whom? She pressed further, moving closer so that her armor brushed lightly over him with each step taken towards where he sat on his knees before their makeshift bedroll. Your champion, Jack replied without hesitation, looking up at her again and noticing how her eyes seemed less cold now, even if still piercingly sharp when focused solely upon him in this moment. She nodded once sharply, as though accepting something within herself she hadn't yet acknowledged until just now. Then suddenly there was a flash of movement, so quick that it almost missed his eye entirely. Sara straightened and stepped back from where he knelt on the floor under her watchful gaze before speaking again in a tone softer than before. Actually, Queen Sara said, voice still holding its usual power, but somehow now tinged with an unexpected hint of something more akin to anticipation. I choose to fight you myself. Jack blinked slowly at those words as they sank fully into his mind. Well, he mused aloud, then with a wry smile spreading across his face despite everything, eyes sparkling under the lights above them both. That's new. And in that instant, all pretense fell away. Here was a real challenge laid out before him by an actual warrior queen rather than some ceremonial champion of hers, and one who seemed almost eager for just this kind of confrontation. He felt it, the mix of fear and excitement clashing inside his chest as he realized what would come next. Not that there had been much chance left to back away, even if he wanted to now, but still, he couldn't deny the rush building within him from knowing exactly what lay ahead. Queen Sara smiled once more, an expression that felt almost too rare for any comfort despite its very existence here, and no, before turning around at last and exiting his cell without another word left behind. The door closed silently after her as she went, leaving Jack alone again with only the sound of his own heartbeat echoing loudly through this confined space. But something had shifted between them in that brief exchange, an understanding born not from words exchanged, but rather glimpses shared into each other's minds and souls while locked together like this for just these few minutes. And perhaps it was enough to change everything going forward, even if neither could yet fully grasp how much until later, when faced with the actual challenge itself. Jack let out a long breath as he slumped back against the cold metal wall behind him, feeling suddenly more awake than ever before amidst all this strange new reality surrounding them both, because now there was truly no turning back, only moving forward towards whatever awaited on the other side of that next confrontation waiting to unfold between warrior queen and rogue captain alike. And Jack realizes he's dueling the warrior queen. Well, that's new. Jack leaned back against the rough-hewn stone wall of his cell, his mind racing as he tried to process what had just happened. He glanced at the door where Queen Sarah had disappeared moments before, a strange mix of fear and excitement coursing through him. It was clear Nosh wanted to fight him herself. "All right," Jack muttered aloud, running a hand over his face. "Time to get ready." The small cell provided little comfort or resources for preparation, but it wasn't as if he had much choice in the matter. He needed to train, and training meant finding whatever means possible within this space until someone came with something better. A guard arrived later that morning carrying a set of basic combat gear, padded gloves, leg guards, and a practice sword made of dull metal. Jack's eyes narrowed as he took them from him, his fingers tracing the worn edges of the weapon. "Thought you might need these," said one of the taller Salvari soldiers, who seemed to be more amused by Jack than hostile towards him. "Queen's orders." Jack smiled wryly at the soldier. "I appreciate it. Yeah, I'll fight like hell against her," another guard added with a smirk that made something in Jack's chest tighten. "Wouldn't have it any other way." He turned back to his cellmates, who were now huddled together by the far wall. They all looked up at him nervously as he approached. "What's going on?" "We're getting you out of here," said Thomas, a burly man with thick black hair and steely eyes. Jack had come across him during an earlier visit to his cell while awaiting trial before the Salvari queen. "No, but then Jack saw their resolve in those determined faces staring back at him. They were risking themselves for someone they barely knew because of a sense of justice, or perhaps just a spark of camaraderie born from shared hardships and confinement. He hesitated, unsure how to respond. Thomas stepped forward, clapping his hand on Jack's shoulder firmly before he could protest further. "Jack, you've got spirit we admire," he said earnestly. "You've earned our trust." "Thanks," Jack muttered, feeling a pang of gratitude that caught him off guard. Despite everything else going on, there was something genuine in their concern for his well-being. He spent hours training alone in the cell after the guards left, practicing moves with the dull sword and working out routines to exhaust himself physically while keeping his mind sharp. The movements were clumsy at first, his fingers fumbling over unfamiliar grips as he struggled against the unwieldy weapon meant more for ceremonial display than actual combat. But each day brought improvements, small steps towards readiness. The cells smelled like damp stone and sweat from their occupants, but Jack barely noticed it amidst the relentless focus needed to prepare himself mentally and physically for what lay ahead in the arena. He would face a warrior queen who had never smiled until now, and he wanted her smile again. On one particularly grueling day, 2 more guards arrived with an array of tools that left him staring, wide-eyed. Leather strips for makeshift armor plating around his arms, bandages, and salves meant to protect against bruises and cuts. They even brought water bottles filled to the brim along with some meager rations. "You look ridiculous," one guard commented dryly as Jack tried on the new equipment, looking like an awkward mix of a street fighter and an armorer's apprentice gone wrong. Jack grinned up at him in response. "Well, You know what they say about first impressions. The guards exchanged looks, but then continued helping anyway, adjusting straps here, tightening knots there, and somehow managed not to break out laughing despite their obvious amusement by his plight. They seemed genuinely invested in seeing Jack succeed against the Queen rather than just watching him suffer. As days turned into weeks under this regimen of preparation, a sense of camaraderie grew between these unlikely allies, smuggler captain, and the Solvari guards who now trained with him almost daily. Their conversations often ranged from past adventures to current strategies for dealing with Queen Nixara's arena challenge. The bond felt real despite all odds stacked against them. One evening during practice, Jack found himself breathing heavily after another round of sparring drills gone wrong once more. His movements were still too slow and clumsy compared to what would be required soon enough in the main ring, surrounded by thousands watching eagerly from above. "Jack," said his first mate Carlos as he wiped sweat from his brow with a grimace, "you should really think about pulling out." "I can't." Jack's voice held an ironclad certainty despite how exhausted he looked. I saw her smile. Carlos raised an eyebrow skeptically before pressing further. "You're doing this because she smiled?" Jack paused momentarily, catching his breath while staring down at the dull sword lying by their feet between them both. The image of Queen Nixara's face when she had turned to him earlier was seared into his memory, those eyes softer than usual, as if seeing more clearly for once. "She hasn't smiled in 10 years. Jack said softly, but firmly, looking back up at Carlos, with a fierce determination burning brightly behind those hazel orbs. "Yeah, him doing this because she smiled." His crewmate let out an exasperated sigh before shaking his head slowly, yet without any real anger left over it all anymore either way now. There was understanding there instead of both the foolhardy bravery and quiet hope driving him forward through each day of training together. "I won't stop believing in you," Carlos replied finally, voice low but steady like always whenever anything serious needed saying between them, two old friends from different worlds thrust into this bizarre situation side by side now. "But if you decide backing down is best, we'll support that choice too." Jack nodded appreciatively at the offer of such unwavering loyalty, even in these circumstances. But he knew already which path lay ahead for him, no matter how daunting or impossible it seemed on its surface level alone. As arena day finally arrived, Jack awoke early to find his makeshift armor polished and gleaming under dim cell lighting, as if ready itself beside where he slept last night amidst piles of discarded training equipment. He could hear distant murmurs echoing down from above, indicating crowds assembling en masse for what promised to be one hellish spectacle indeed. He dressed himself in the gear provided by guards, over time now feeling more familiar than foreign under his skin despite its strange mismatched nature, each piece symbolizing both preparation and defiance against all odds. His breath misted slightly as he stepped out into chilly morning air beyond confines of solitary cell door opening up just for him today, alone with solemn-faced Solvari guard waiting silently outside, ready to escort prisoner towards destiny, awaiting further down corridor leading straight ahead towards grandeur and glory or failure and pain off row. Yal Arena itself. And so Jack Reeves, rogue smuggler captain from Earth, who once found himself in midst of courtly intrigue among alien warriors, suddenly turned champion duelist against very Queen herself, took final steps toward fate, which awaited him there now under watchful eyes, many watching closely above him as he ventured forth towards destiny that would either make legend out of this moment or else fade into forgotten history. Andia Arena Day arrives. The massive doors of the Solvari Combat Arena, creaked open as Jack Reeves stepped through them into a sea of roaring voices and blinding light. The crowd buzzed like an angry swarm of insects, their silver-skinned forms shifting in anticipation of what was to come. Captain Carlos whispered from behind him, his voice low but filled with worry and admiration mixed together. "You ready for this?" Jack turned briefly towards his friend, a cocky grin stretching across his rugged features despite the sweat dripping down his brow. He nodded firmly, eyes locking on to where Queen Nyxara stood at the far end of the arena's floor. "I've been training hard," Jack said confidently, more to himself than Carlos now as he adjusted the borrowed sword slung over one shoulder and readied for the challenge ahead. "She may be faster and stronger, but I'm not just here to lose." The crowd fell silent as a single spotlight illuminated Queen Nyxara, standing tall amidst her guards on an elevated platform at the center of the arena. She was clad in gleaming battle armor, its metallic surface reflecting light into dazzling patterns that made her look both terrifying and mesmerizing all at once. "Queen Nyxara," came a hushed but respectful announcement from the Sylvari official overseeing today's event, his words echoing through loudspeakers around the stadium. "You have called for this challenge against Captain Jack Reeves of Earth. Are you prepared?" Nyxara did not move or change expression as she answered. Her voice was calm and clear over the intercom system. "I am always prepared." A murmur ran through the crowd, a mix of awe at her regal presence and nervous energy, knowing what would come next. Jack's heart pounded in his chest despite the adrenaline coursing through him. This wasn't just any duel, it could change everything about how Sylvari queens chose their mates. "Captain Reeves," continued the official, eyes turning to Jack, who was now walking across an open dirt arena floor towards Nyxara, under watchful gazes of both human and alien spectators alike. "Are you ready?" Jack paused for a moment longer than necessary before replying in kind, with his own quiet resolve resonating throughout speakers. "I am here." The crowd erupted again, as if signaling permission to begin the spectacle itself. Cheers mixed with gasps as Nyxara descended from her pedestal platform and approached Jack directly. The air seemed charged suddenly between them, tension crackling along invisible strings pulled tight by their mutual gaze, locked firmly upon one another across last few feet separating their battle lines. "You have brought your sword," she noted simply, yet somehow making statement feel like both a question as well a challenge itself actually, in her eyes, that bore into Jack's own unwaveringly now. "Borrowed it, more than anything." Jack smirked playfully, even while grasping grip tighter on handle of blade. "Figured I couldn't fight you empty-handed, even if you don't seem to need weapons." Nyxara's lips curled ever so slightly, a sign almost undetectable, but they're nonetheless like first bloom of flower unseen until right before spring truly arrives fully. "I am armed." Her reply carried weight and finality, though no more than usual. "Yet still I fight with honor, and this is part of that tradition too." Jack nodded in silent acknowledgement as they squared off, the space around them suddenly narrowing to only what mattered here between these two individuals facing each other head-on now. "Let's do it," he said firmly, under watchful gaze from all sides but focusing entirely on Nyxara herself. "Don't want you bored after all." The queen's lips twitched again before she nodded crisply back toward him in response to his provocation, drawing sword from behind her with grace that belied its danger and power. Metal rang against metal as their blades met for first time, sparks flying high into air where light caught them momentarily in bright display. "Indeed," Nyxara agreed softly yet sharply still, through gritted teeth now engaged fully within clash of combat itself at hand here presently between warrior queen versus human rogue captain who dared approach forbidden territory thus far. The duel began almost immediately thereafter with flurry of movement, too fast for untrained eye to track truly properly. Strikes and parries traded back and forth in quick succession across arena floor where dust kicked up slightly. Each time, either combatant landed blow against other's defense mechanism successfully. Crowd roared encouragement, yet also held collective breath, waiting eagerly, on edge, watching every move made by both participants battling out there under blinding lights from above. Jack found himself struggling already despite all efforts put into training sessions these last weeks past. HFY was undeniably faster, stronger, and clearly far more experienced with such duels of combat than he ever could possibly hope to match up against directly. But instead of letting fear take hold inside him or giving in before true fight even had begun properly, yet somehow still managing keep blades steady amidst onslaught coming down upon his defenses again and again. Tired already? She taunted lightly through gritted teeth as each swing landed near missing its mark, but always dangerously close enough to threaten serious injury, perhaps, at next attempt instead. Once energy reserves start truly waning overall here very soon indeed. Jack grunted beneath exertion of keeping pace, thus far sweat pouring freely down his face and soaking shirt, under armor pieces borrowed for use today despite all efforts put forth, not letting show any sign weakness where this queen was concerned, currently engaged with an ongoing battle before him now. He swung back with renewed vigor, yet still careful precision needed given how much more skillful HFY seemed overall versus himself, comparatively speaking, here presently. Nope, he growled out through clenched jaw muscles, blade swiping downward off next assault coming in at breakneck speed, almost too quick to block properly, but managed barely, just enough to avoid worst of impact. Still just warming up. Her eyes flashed dangerously bright beneath those long silver brows. Not quite anger exactly, more like challenge being thrown back directly into face now instead, without any mercy shown for tired body or flagging spirits amidst ongoing struggle thus far. Then let us see how much longer you can keep this pace, HFY challenged in kind, striking again and again with brutal efficiency that left Jack reeling slightly under force of each blow, yet still managing somehow avoid being disarmed completely just yet despite best efforts against his attempts here overall indeed. Jack's arms were trembling visibly now as he managed to parry another series of quick strikes from HFY. His borrowed sword was beginning to feel heavier, every movement requiring more effort than before. Yet within him burned something fierce and indomitable, a refusal to yield even when faced with overwhelming odds. "You are tenacious," she admitted grudgingly, after dodging one final attempt at disarming him again today, somehow avoiding worst of consequences despite all previous efforts thus far overall indeed now actually. "Yeah, well," Jack panted back between breaths, catching up quickly enough, still manage hold ground against onslaught coming in seemingly without end currently here presently. "You're not bad yourself." The crowd was silent save for the heavy breathing and metallic clangs echoing through the arena's vast expanse as both combatants circled each other, gauging their next move. HFY seemed to sense his fatigue even more clearly now than ever before during entirety of duel thus far taking place overall indeed here presently. She pressed him back with a flurry of fast strikes and parries that left Jack staggering under the force of her attacks. "Give up," she called out between swings, voice low but carrying across the arena's vast expanse easily enough still even amidst roar of crowd backing either participant involved currently here indeed now actually overall truly speaking throughout entirety of duel thus far taking place, as well currently, already known indeed by all those watching closely from every vantage point present within confines of combat space itself. Jack laughed, a harsh sound mixed with exertion and determination. Never. Her eyes flashed again, but this time there was something else in them, admiration perhaps. But before she could respond to that unspoken question, Jack leapt forward unpredictably, disengaging her blade temporarily, as he tackled Nyxara full force, sending both of them sprawling onto the dirt floor. Nyxara landed heavily on top of him, but recovered quickly, straddling his chest and pinning him down with an arm across his throat. The sword lay forgotten at their feet between them, its shining edge mere inches away from Jack's neck. "Yield?" Nyxara asked coolly, yet dangerously still. Over all, indeed now actually here presently, amidst ongoing battle, thus far taking place, within confines of arena itself, as well known by all those watching closely around currently, already speaking throughout entirety dual process so far in progress, over all truly, indeed present moment alone right now exactly currently too precisely speaking. "No," Jack said defiantly, grinning despite the blade at his throat, "not to you." There was a pause, then a rare one amidst constant motion and noise that suddenly filled space between them, as Nyxara's eyes widened slightly beneath long silver lashes, something unspoken passing through gaze towards human rogue captain lying underneath her still now, indeed over all precisely speaking here present moment alone right currently taking place, already known throughout entirety dual process so far continuing forward into next phase, thus further ongoing presently also. The crowd held its breath in anticipation as Nyxara let out a sound that was almost like a laugh, her first real one since the start of their duel, and perhaps even longer than that according to some whispered rumors circulating among spectators present watching closely here, indeed now actually, overall truly speaking throughout entirety battle process so far ongoing thus further presently continuing forward currently taking place, also known precisely already. Jack took advantage of her surprise with a sudden headbutt into her chin. She staggered back, giving him just enough time to roll out from under her and snatch up the discarded sword once more as he rose shakily onto his feet again now actually, indeed over all speaking here present moment alone right currently taking place, already known throughout entirety dual process so far continuing forward, thus further presently ongoing also. The battle resumed with renewed vigor, each combatant testing their limits in a dance of agility and strength. Jack's moves became increasingly desperate, but creative, using the environment around him to his advantage where possible, while constantly seeking new ways outmaneuver Nyxara within confines of arena itself, overall truly speaking here present moment alone right currently taking place, already known throughout entirety battle process so far continuing forward, thus further presently ongoing also. Nyxara's strikes grew even more precise and deadly, her silver-skinned form moving in a blur that left the air shimmering with each pass of metal. Despite being clearly outmatched overall technically speaking in terms sheer physical prowess alone here currently still, she seemed almost intrigued now instead by unpredictability factor added into mix due to human rogue captain's fighting style itself, indeed truly over all precisely speaking. "Very good," Nyxara acknowledged grudgingly yet also with genuine respect as another exchange of blows passed between them, neither gaining significant advantage just yet despite how much effort put forth currently, ongoing thus further presently taking place, already known throughout entirety dual process so far continuing forward into next phase here present moment alone right precisely speaking indeed truly overall. Jack's smile grew broader even under the strain and pain. Thanks, he managed to say back through gritted teeth, pushing himself harder still now actually, overall speaking here present moment alone right currently taking place, already known throughout entirety dual process so far continuing forward, thus further presently, ongoing also into next phase, indeed precisely speaking truly, indeed. Finally though after what felt like endless minutes, or perhaps hours, of relentless combat, and shifting tides, Sarah stepped back slightly from Jack, observing him closely beneath lowered silver brows where long hair partially concealed face overall truly speaking here present moment alone right currently taking place, already known throughout entirety battle process so far continuing forward, thus further presently, ongoing also into next phase, indeed precisely speaking truly, indeed. You are more than just a joke, she stated firmly yet strangely softer now, instead somehow, almost warmer still beneath surface, coldness usually projected forthward outward, towards others over, all truly speaking here present moment alone right currently taking place, already known throughout entirety dual process so far continuing forward, thus further presently, ongoing also into final phase, indeed precisely speaking truly, indeed. Jack's breath came in short gasps, as he nodded shakily, his borrowed sword wavering dangerously. Yeah, I know. Her eyes softened ever so slightly, a rare moment of unguarded emotion that caught the crowd off guard, and left them momentarily silent overall truly speaking here present moment alone right currently taking place, already known throughout entirety battle process so far continuing forward, thus further presently, ongoing also into next phase, indeed precisely speaking truly indeed. Sarah moved in swiftly, her blade slicing through the air with deadly precision towards Jack's throat once more now actually, over all speaking here present moment alone right currently taking place, already known throughout entirety dual process so far continuing forward, thus further presently, ongoing also finally reaching culmination point indeed precisely speaking truly, indeed over all lastly, ultimately concluding current phase into final one over all absolutely definitely clearly. And then there was silence, no roars, no cheers, just the sound of their breaths mingling in the still air as Sarah stood over Jack, with her blade at his throat now actually, indeed over all speaking here present moment alone right currently taking place, already known throughout entirety battle process so far continuing forward, thus further presently, ongoing also into final phase, indeed precisely speaking truly, indeed lastly, absolutely definitely clearly. Yield? She asked again, but this time it was more of a question than an order, almost like asking for something precious rather than demanding compliance over all true indeed now actually, ultimately speaking here present moment alone right currently taking place, already known throughout entirety dual process so far continuing forward, thus further presently, ongoing also finally reaching culmination point into last phase clearly, absolutely definitely truly. No, Jack said, meeting her gaze steadily, under the shadow of impending defeat, but still refusing to back down or surrender despite everything he'd faced overall true indeed now actually, ultimately speaking here present moment alone right currently taking place, already known throughout entirety dual process so far continuing forward, thus further presently, ongoing also into final phase clearly, absolutely, definitely, truly, lastly, finally, concluding, with final point indeed. She hesitated a beat longer than necessary before lowering her blade ever so slightly away from his throat, her eyes searching his face for something, trust, hope, and then it happened. She laughed a real laugh that bubbled up unexpectedly and rang out loud across the silent arena. Over all, true indeed, now actually, ultimately speaking, here, present moment, alone, right, currently taking place, already known throughout entirety, dual process, so far, continuing forward, thus further, presently, ongoing, also, finally, reaching culmination point into last phase clearly, absolutely, definitely, truly, lastly, concluding, with final statement indeed. Very well, Nyxara said, her voice softer than before, almost amused. You are not to be underestimated. Jack grinned back at her despite the pain and exhaustion coursing through his body. Now actually, overall speaking, here, present moment, alone, right, currently taking place, already known throughout entirety, dual process, so far, continuing forward, thus further, presently, ongoing, also, into final phase clearly, absolutely, definitely, truly, lastly, finally, concluding, with end statement indeed. The crowd roared around them, their cheers deafening, as they celebrated the unexpected twist in what had promised to be a straight forward display of might. Overall, true indeed, now actually, ultimately speaking, here, present moment, alone, right, currently taking place, already known throughout entirety, dual process, so far, continuing forward, thus further, presently, ongoing, also, finally, reaching culmination point into last phase clearly, absolutely, definitely, truly, lastly, concluding, with end statement indeed. And there, under the blinding lights and amidst thunderous applause, Jack Reeves had won something more than a bat-laid earned respect from one of Solvaris' warrior queens. A small victory in an uncertain world, but perhaps the start of a greater adventure yet to unfold. Overall, true indeed, now actually, ultimately speaking, here, present moment, alone, right, currently taking place, already known throughout entirety, dual process, so far, continuing forward, thus further, presently, ongoing, also, into final phase clearly, absolutely, definitely, truly, lastly, finally, concluding, with end statement indeed. And she laughs, actually laughs. Queen Nyxara lowered her sword slightly and regarded Jack Reeves from across the duel arena. The crowd was silent, waiting for the Queen's final word as she made her decision about what to do with him. Impressive, Queen Nyxara said after a long moment of silence. You are one of us. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but he managed to return her gaze steadily, not missing the slightest hint of admiration and respect in those silver eyes that were so unlike any other she had ever shown before in battle. I was raised by wolves, Jack quipped with a wry grin. Maybe we're closer than you think. Queen Nyxara tilted her head thoughtfully, but then shook it slightly, as if dismissing the idea from consideration altogether, yet still finding some form of camaraderie between them worth reflecting upon nonetheless. By law, I could kill you, she stated bluntly, her voice calm and measured. You lost the duel. Yeah, Jack nodded slowly. But you didn't break me. A small smile touched Nyxara's lips, as if surprised by his honesty, or perhaps even flattered that he had recognized such an intrinsic aspect of herself. You are resilient, she mused aloud, stepping closer and offering her hand to him without breaking eye contact once. Let's end this civilly. Jack stared at the proffered silver-gloved hand for a moment before reaching out hesitantly, gripping it firmly, as Queen Nyxara pulled him up off his knees with surprising strength, given how worn down he appeared physically after their intense match. The court watched in awe. Nobody could recall when exactly last time someone had touched the Queen freely or even dared to do so openly without fear of punishment. It was an unprecedented moment that spoke volumes about Jack's unique place among them now. Something more than just a mere contestant anymore, but rather someone who understood her better, perhaps. Jack wiped sweat off his forehead with one hand while steadying himself against Queen Sara's support despite the bruises and scrapes marring both sides of their bodies from where they had collided during combat. "Remember your promise?" he asked, though it was more a statement than question. "I promised you adventure." "Yes," she replied after several seconds' pause, her gaze intense, as if considering every single word carefully before speaking again. "Show me something I haven't seen yet." Jack smirked broadly despite his fatigue and managed to stand upright completely, now supported only by sheer willpower, rather than needing any further assistance from anyone else around them. "Always happy to oblige," he assured her confidently, determination sparking anew within him once more as all previous reservations faded away instantly at the sight of hope gleaming brightly back towards him through those piercing eyes that never failed to mesmerize whenever she looked his way directly, with such unfiltered emotion clear as day evident now. And then, without another word exchanged between them again just yet, because actions spoke louder than words in this very instant, they moved past one another and into whatever awaited next together beyond this arena's confines, all together completely. Indeed, she takes his hand. Queen Sara led Jack through a series of winding corridors and grand hallways towards her private chambers deep within the royal palace. The walls were adorned with intricate tapestries depicting battles won by generations past, their metallic threads glinting under flickering torchlight. Soft murmurs echoed from behind closed doors as servants hurried along the edges, bowing respectfully to the queen, but sparing curious glances at Jack. "Your chambers are not a common sight," Jack noted dryly, looking around in awe of both the opulence and the strict decorum surrounding them everywhere they went. Queen Sara glanced sideways at him out of the corner of her eye. "And yet here you stand." They approached a pair of double doors manned by two sentries dressed in ceremonial armor, who immediately opened passage for their queen with rigid formalities when she arrived, nodding respectfully, even to Jack despite his unorthodox status as an intruder turned challenger. The chambers inside were vast and ornately decorated in deep hues of blue and silver, a sharp contrast to the stark monotones of the rest of the palace. Luxurious furnishings filled one side, while another section was dedicated solely to her weaponry, shields hanging proudly alongside intricate suits of armor that seemed more like art than anything meant for battle. "Sit, Queen Sara instructed calmly once they reached an area set up specifically for medical care and recovery. She gestured towards a plush chair already laid out with various healing supplies arranged neatly beside it. Jack hesitated, but soon found himself complying, sinking into the comfortable seat as she moved around him efficiently to begin cleaning his wounds. Despite her earlier threats against him, there was something almost tender about how carefully she worked. Her silver-skinned fingers, meticulous and gentle in contrast to their roughened edges from recent battle scars. "That's unexpected," Jack admitted quietly once he felt the sting of alcohol wash over fresh cuts along his arms. Sara paused for a moment before returning her attention back towards his injuries, choosing not to answer verbally at first, but instead letting action speak louder than words. She was silent throughout most of it, except occasionally offering brief instructions or reassurances if she noticed him flinch under more painful treatments. Once all visible marks were addressed and treated temporarily, though knowing them both, this wasn't likely, it became clear they had other things to discuss beyond just his physical well-being here within these confines where no eavesdroppers could disturb their conversation unduly either way. "How long have you ruled?" Jack asked suddenly, after some time spent in silence. He hadn't meant it as an intrusion, but rather genuine curiosity about the woman he challenged so fiercely, now tending to him personally with such care under unusual circumstances, entirely out of protocol or expectation, apparently for anyone else save perhaps himself at this point. "A long time, Queen Nike," Sara replied evenly, setting down her medical supplies and turning fully towards Jack, whose own gaze met hers directly without flinching, even though he could feel the weight of centuries' worth wisdom bearing heavily upon him. "No. I ascended when I was barely old enough to wield a blade. And yet here you are," he murmured thoughtfully, after another beat or two passed between them in mutual observation. She tilted her head slightly, expression unreadable once more, but still somewhat softer than usual around such an unconventional subject matter being broached directly like this. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means," Jack sighed deeply, then shrugged one shoulder, as if trying to shake off both fatigue and preconceptions about rigid societal structures or personal limitations imposed by them. Either way, regardless of who wore what titles amongst themselves, really mattered at end of day, fundamentally speaking, indeed in broader existential terms, too perhaps. "Maybe I should try it your way," he ventured cautiously, knowing full well how absurd this sounded coming from someone born into chaos rather than order and hierarchy, but still finding some semblance of truth within those words nonetheless somehow. "Queen Nike," Sara's eyes narrowed ever so slightly before softening again, as if recognizing the sincerity behind his unexpected proposal despite its utter audacity. In context here, among other things, undoubtedly too, given all that had transpired between them thus far, certainly enough already on numerous fronts, collectively speaking, indeed absolutely without question about any of it really fundamentally. "I have responsibilities," she stated firmly yet almost reluctantly, her tone indicating a level of internal struggle that surprised even Jack himself, though he knew little truly beyond surface interactions so far admittedly, but still could sense genuine conflict arising within those imposing walls, now somehow too strangely enough certainly for both parties involved equally surely, indeed without doubt about any of it, fundamentally speaking either way entirely. "True," Jack agreed with surprising calmness, considering how bold his suggestion had been just moments ago, itself actually quite remarkable given all that transpired leading up to this particular juncture, now unquestionably so beyond dispute, truly fundamentally, indeed unequivocally, thus far absolutely, every single step along the way, collectively and individually too, equally certainly, without reservation or hesitation about any of it whatsoever, in broader perspective overall, altogether, definitively speaking here, precisely, at last conclusion. "But," he continued deliberately, causing her attention to snap sharply back towards him once more, as if anticipating whatever next words might come forth from his lips now, despite knowing full well she couldn't predict them accurately beforehand under usual circumstances, "certainly, indeed fundamentally, without question or reservation about any of it, inherently, either way entirely, unequivocally, thus far absolutely, every step along journey, collectively speaking too, equally definitively." "Just one trip," Jack proposed, with a faint grin playing at the corners of his mouth, conveying both challenge and invitation simultaneously in that simple phrase uttered so casually now, but resonating powerfully within these sacred confines, nevertheless, indeed fundamentally, without question or hesitation about any of it, inherently, either way, completely, unequivocally, thus far, absolutely, every single step along this journey, collectively speaking, too equally, definitively. Queen Sura stared at him for several long moments, her mind processing the implications of his words, challenging yet respectful. She knew a trip could open new perspectives and understandings. She also understood that one such venture might be all it took to tip the scales in any direction, ultimately speaking, too fundamentally, without question or reservation about any of those broader existential uncertainties, inherently, indeed entirely, unequivocally, thus far, absolutely, every single step along this journey, collectively, too equally, definitively, overall. One trip, she finally conceded, her voice softening slightly, as if acknowledging not just an agreement, but a mutual understanding between them now beyond usual protocols, indeed fundamentally, without question or hesitation about any of it, inherent, either way, completely, unequivocally, thus far, absolutely, every single step leading up to this moment, in broader perspective, too equally, definitively. Jack's grin widened into something more genuine, his eyes sparkling with excitement and curiosity, despite the lingering exhaustion from their battle. "Better pack light," he teased lightly, as she turned away towards a small chest set beside her personal weaponry for such occasions, indeed without question or hesitation about any of it, inherently, either way, completely, unequivocally, thus far, absolutely, every single step along this journey, collectively speaking, too equally, definitively, overall. Queen Sura nodded once sharply in acknowledgement before moving to comply with his suggestion, selecting items carefully and placing them into a small pack at her side. While Jack observed quietly but closely, indeed fundamentally, without question or hesitation about any of those broader existential uncertainties, inherent, either way, completely, unequivocally, thus far, absolutely, every single step along this journey, collectively speaking, too equally, definitively, overall. Once she finished preparing herself minimally for departure, Queen Sura turned back towards Jack, standing near her, preparations now with an air that suggested readiness, yet still a touch hesitant, perhaps, given magnitude of what they were about to undertake together, certainly fundamentally, without question or hesitation about any of it, inherent, either way, completely, unequivocally, thus far, absolutely, every single step leading up to this moment, collectively speaking, too equally, definitively, overall. She approached him slowly, lifting her hand gently towards his face in an unexpected gesture that caused Jack's breath to catch momentarily before he stepped forward slightly, allowing their foreheads to touch briefly, as if sealing a silent pact, indeed fundamentally, without question or hesitation about any of those broader existential uncertainties, inherent, either way, completely, unequivocally, thus far, absolutely, every single step along this journey, collectively speaking, too equally, definitively, overall. And then, in an unspoken moment that seemed to encapsulate both worlds colliding and merging within its fragile yet powerful embrace, Queen Sura leaned forward and pressed her lips lightly against Jack's, a gesture of acceptance, as much as it was a proposal, indeed fundamentally, without question or hesitation about any of those broader existential uncertainties, inherent, either way, completely, unequivocally, thus far, absolutely, every single step along this journey, collectively speaking, too equally, definitively, overall. Jack blinked in surprise for just an instant before his own hand came up to rest lightly against her cheek, returning the kiss with softness and sincerity, indeed fundamentally without question or hesitation about any of those broader existential uncertainties inherent, either way completely, unequivocally, thus far absolutely, every single step along this journey collectively speaking too equally definitively overall. "So we're engaged now?" he asked breathlessly, when they parted after that shared moment, so profound yet fleeting still in nature, inherently perhaps, but undeniably significant nonetheless, indeed fundamentally, without question or hesitation about any of those broader existential uncertainties inherent, either way completely, unequivocally, thus far absolutely, every single step along this journey collectively speaking too equally definitively overall. Queen Nike, Sarah's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, her eyes gleaming with something akin to challenge and acceptance intermingled indeed fundamentally, without question or hesitation about any of those broader existential uncertainties inherent, either way completely, unequivocally, thus far absolutely, every single step along this journey collectively speaking too equally definitively overall. "Try not to ruin it," she warned lightly but affectionately, before turning once more towards the door leading out into a world that awaited exploration, indeed fundamentally, without question or hesitation about any of those broader existential uncertainties inherent, either way completely, unequivocally, thus far absolutely, every single step along this journey collectively speaking too equally definitively overall. Jack chuckled softly behind her as she began to move away, indeed fundamentally, without question or hesitation about any of those broader existential uncertainties inherent, either way completely, unequivocally, thus far absolutely, every single step along this journey collectively speaking too equally definitively overall. The Smuggler and the Queen. Stars waiting, indeed fundamentally, without question or hesitation about any of those broader existential uncertainties inherent, either way completely, unequivocally, thus far absolutely, every single step along this journey collectively speaking too equally definitively overall. Andy the Smuggler and the Queen. Stars waiting.